Thank you for attending our webinar today titled Vision Changes After Brain Injury, See What is Possible. My name is Annie Randolph, and I'm a Neuro Resource Facilitator with the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa, and we are very excited to share this webinar with you today. Now I would like to introduce our guest speaker today. Sue Sandahl is a 1998 graduate of the University of St. Catherine. She has worked in multiple settings, including hospitals, long-term acute care, skilled nursing facilities, outpatient adult, and pediatrics. Sue has been working at All Life since 2014 in the Outpatient Neurorehabilitation Program, treating persons served who have experienced stroke, traumatic brain injury, concussion, Parkinson's disease, and brain cancer. She has worked with persons served with vision deficits following the brain injury for over the past 8 years. So welcome, Sue, and I will go ahead and let you get started. Just let me know when you want to change slides.
Okay, thank you, Annie. You can move on to the next slide. It's about me. I just want to say thank you again, Annie, for inviting me to speak today, and thanks to all the listeners for joining in. And as you can see in this slide, has the information that Annie gave you about myself. But I also wanted to make sure you were aware that I'm a married mom of an 11-year-old son. I enjoy reading, watching Fixer Upper, and baking. And as an occupational therapist, this is important for me to know these kinds of things about the person served that I work with, because this is a way that I can gear their vision treatment interventions towards their preferred roles and activities. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that about myself too, so that you kind of know where the heck I'm coming from. So we can go to the next slide. So our objectives today are, we're going to discuss common vision changes after brain injury. And I just wanted to let you know that there are many ways that brain injury can affect vision beyond the ways I'm going to be talking about today. But for the purposes of this presentation, I selected 5 of some of the more common changes that people experience after brain injury. And then for identifying where to seek help and how therapies can be helpful. And the third objective of discuss how to move forward with lifelong changes in vision. Those 2 objectives, I believe, work very closely hand in hand with each other. So as I go through the PowerPoint today, those 2 might be a little more intertwined, but you'll see how they relate as we go along. So let's see. Just want to check my notes here. So in the presentation for resources, I just want to let you know I'll be covering some medical resources, eye doctor resources, OT resources, and some different government types resources that can be beneficial for people experiencing vision changes after brain injury. So before we get into the common vision changes after brain injury, I want to give a brief overview of the anatomy of vision. And I think this will help us understand why vision is so susceptible to change from after a brain injury. So there's 3 main anatomy areas that I will be covering. The anatomy of the eye and the optic nerve, including the musculature of the eye, and the basic anatomy of vision in the brain. So on to the next slide for eye and optic nerve anatomy. So let's look at these 2 first. So you can see there are lots of components in the eyeball itself, and so you can understand why it would be susceptible to damage, either from trauma to the eyeball or eye socket itself from a traumatic brain injury, or tearing or shearing in the eyeball itself. And a lot of the folks that I work with in occupational therapy after they have had a brain injury and have had vision changes, this is kind of where I think a lot of the folks understand vision changes. Okay, something has damaged my eye, something has damaged my optic nerve. That makes sense to them why they are having vision changes. So next we'll move on to, in addition to the optic nerve and the eyeball itself, there is the musculature of the human eye, and the brain is actually what controls the musculature of the eyeballs. And not only can the areas of the brain that can be damaged from stroke or brain trauma, the muscles themselves can also be damaged from like a trauma or blunt force compression or severing of the muscle. Okay, and then in the next slide, in this final slide of vision anatomy, so you can go on to the next one, Annie. We see the brain anatomy relating to vision. So I just want to orient you a little bit to what you are seeing. So at the top of the slide, there's two little half brains, orange and blue. And then underneath that are the round parts. Those are your eyeballs. And then coming from there is the optic nerve that connects the signals from the eyes to the tracts in the brain. And from there, you can see there's pretty long tracks that go all the way to the bottom of this slide there, and that is that represents the occipital lobes. And the occipital lobes are the primary processing center for vision in our brain. However, you can see this is not a wireless system from our eyeballs to our brain. Our vision has to go through all parts of our brain so that our brain knows how to, for example, move our bodies through space based on the visual information it is given. Our vision is important to be able to help our balance system in our brain, keep us from falling over. And vision is used to help keep track of what we are reading and storing it in our memory. So those are just a few examples of how damage after brain injury can affect more than just how we see. It can affect all those different systems too. So anywhere along those pathways can be damaged after trauma or a stroke or some such anatomical deficit also. So that's why we can see so many different changes after brain injury in vision. So now, after you kind of see how the vision is a huge part of our brain, what are some of the common changes that can occur after brain injury? So today I will be covering 5 different areas. We'll be looking at visual acuity, contrast sensitivity, visual field, ocular motor function, and visual attention. Now again, just as a friendly reminder, these are vision changes. These types of vision changes are common, but they are not the only vision changes that can happen after a brain injury. But for the purposes of this program, we're going to just kind of stick with these 5 changes. So the first change that I wanted to discuss is there can be changes in visual acuity after brain injury. And so what is visual acuity? That is the ability to see small visual detail or the sharpness of vision. And most of the folks that I talk about, and like even family members, and before I start working with vision and occupational therapy, this seems to be the area where most people think of when they think of vision, because you go to the eye doctor if you have blurry vision and you get eyeglasses. So visual acuity is one thing that I think most people understand the most about vision. So how can it be affected after brain injury? So the sharpness of our vision can be affected if there is actual damage or trauma to the eyeball itself, to the optic nerve, the retina in the eye, or even in the brain stem. If any of these parts are damaged, it can cause some blurry vision, decreased ability for your pupil to respond to light, which causes sensitivity to bright light. And the light sensitivity is typically from when there's been injury to the brainstem, because that's what controls the automatic reflex of the pupil. So when you think about a person's preferred activities, one of the ways, or some of the ways that visual acuity deficits after a brain injury can affect a person is it can affect their ability to read food labels. So if you're driving and your vision is blurry, you can have difficulty avoiding a collision when you're driving. Or if your vision is blurry after a brain injury, it can make safety when you're preparing meals diminished. And so also when you think about a person's preferred activities, such as baking, which is one of my main fun things that I like to do. If a person enjoys baking and their vision is blurry, it would be difficult for them to read the recipes. It would be difficult for them to read the labels on the ingredients. If a person is sensitive to light, the light from the kitchen may be too bright in some instances, and this could make it a person's tolerance to be able to work in that space diminished. Okay, so we'll go on to contrast sensitivity.
Sorry, there's just a little bit delay when I hit the button.
There you go. So next, we have what's called contrast sensitivity. And that is the ability for us to detect borders and of objects from the background. And how that can be affected after brain injury is if a person has had lesions in their brain, that is an area that can cause contrast sensitivity. For example, if you are trying to pour coffee into a brown cup and you've had a brain injury and you can't, and your contrast sensitivity has been diminished, it would be hard to tell how much coffee you have poured into that cup because you can't distinguish the borders of the coffee from the background of the brown coffee cup. Or, for example, I like mashed potatoes. So if my contrast sensitivity were diminished and I was trying to eat mashed potatoes on a white plate, it might be hard for me to see where the edges of the mashed potato are in relation to the white background of the plate. And then for some people, that can be a more serious deficit is if you're taking, let's say, a medication that is pink and it falls on a peach-colored countertop or a peach-colored tile. It can make it very difficult to locate that medication on that surface if a person's contrast sensitivity is diminished. And so let's continue to use the example of baking also as a preferred activity and how that relates to contrast sensitivity. So for example, if a person has contrast sensitivity after a brain injury and he or she is using like a white mixing bowl on a white countertop, it may be difficult to distinguish the bowl from the counter. Or if a person's pouring in flour or sugar into the bowl and the bowl is white on a white countertop, it could be very difficult for the person to tell where they are pouring the flour or sugar into the bowl, if they're pouring it on the side of the bowl, if they're pouring it right on the countertop. So that is how, like for myself, if I had poor contrast sensitivity, baking might be challenging for me. Okay, we'll go on to the next common change, which is changes in visual field. So our visual field is the panoramic view of our environment as we look straight ahead. And what it consists of is the central vision, and that central vision is the area where we determine the features of an object. And the visual field also includes our peripheral vision. And our peripheral vision is when we're looking straight ahead and we can see kind of the things around the edge. And that's used to determine shapes and movement. So how this can be affected after brain injury. Annie, can you hear it when my email are popping up? Because I'm afraid people are hearing my.
Yeah, I can. It's okay though. If you can shut it off, it's
okay.
Fine. Either way, it's okay.
So, okay. So how our visual field can be affected after brain injury is, if you think back to that picture of the brain anatomy of vision and those orange and blue pathways that lead to our occipital lobes, if we have damage to those pathways that transmit visual information to our occipital lobes, that can lead to what's known as a field cut. Or if you have damage to the area of the brain that processes visual information, that can also lead to a visual field cut. And so when I'm talking about a visual field cut, what that means is the brain is not getting the full visual input or the full visual picture. And so what it does is it tries to make sense of what information it's getting. And so it will actually close the gap in the visual field and interpret that image as an entire visual field, when in fact pieces of that picture are missing. And so it kind of can play tricks on our brain, literally. And so if a person has a visual field cut, this can really affect their ability to complete a structured visual scanning pattern and locate items in the environment. For example, some people, if they have a visual field cut, say on the right side, where their visual field is diminished on the right side, they may only eat half of their meal that's on the left side and not even notice that there is, or see that there is food on the other side of the plate. If a person is reading and they have a visual field cut, they may miss whole words, or they may only read to the middle of the page, thinking that they've actually read across the whole sentence. Or, you know, if you're a woodworker and you're trying to find your tools, or hopefully when you're a woodworker and you have a visual field cut, you may want to keep the project kind of a little more simple to start with before you go on to the really heavy duty projects. But it could make make it difficult for a person to find tools or the pieces of wood or things like that they are trying to locate. Now, when we consider a person who likes to bake, who has a visual field cut, he or she may not be able to locate the ingredients on the shelf because the brain is closing the gap where the picture of some of the ingredients is. And then so the brain's not even processing that there is maybe an ingredient right there where the person is looking. Or if a person is working on baking, they may not be able to locate all the ingredients that they set out on the counter and miss putting in an ingredient. Okay, so next, we have oculomotor function. So ocular motor function is the ability to move both of our eyes together in a coordinated manner to maintain binocular vision. And this can be affected if there is damage in the parietal lobes, the occipital or prefrontal lobes, in the cerebellum and the brainstem. Those can all any damage in any of those areas could potentially affect oculomotor function. It can also be affected by damage to cranial nerves in the brain. If there's a vascular blockage or a disease that can cause deficits to oculomotor function. And a lot of times what can happen is after impairments in oculomotor function is a person can experience double vision. Because if a person is not able to keep both eyes aligned together on a target, then their brain will get one image from one eye and one image from another eye, and not one solid image with both eyes focusing at the same point. Now, if a person has oculomotor function and they're seeing double, obviously it can make it hard to read if you're seeing double letters or double words or double lines. If you're trying to cut your food, it can make it difficult to know where to line up your fork and knife. If you're trying to pay bills and you're trying to read the bill or write out a check and you're seeing double, it makes it very hard to know how to get that done. Also, accessing transportation. In particular, like if you're driving and you're seeing double, you may want to talk to your doctor about whether or not it is safe for you to be driving. Because if you're seeing double and there's like two cars coming at you, it might make it difficult to know, hey, which car is it that I need to avoid? And again, so let's think about a person who likes to bake. So if he or she is reaching for an ingredient and sees two images of that same ingredient, he or she may knock the ingredient over because they may misjudge where to reach if they're seeing two of them. Or because they might not be able to distinguish which image is the real image. Some of the folks that I have worked with tell me that they have learned to figure out which one is the actual object that they're looking at, because sometimes the double image is a little more of a ghosting or a blurry looking image. Okay, and then we'll go on to the next slide. So the last common, so we'll go to visual, there you go, thank you. So the last common vision change that we're going to discuss today is changes in visual attention. So visual attention is the ability to look at objects to obtain information about them, and then also to be able to filter out irrelevant information from the environment, or even being able to filter out a person's own thought processes. And then also to be able to shift focus from one object to another in an organized manner. And there's actually 5 areas of the cortex of our brain that have been identified as playing a role in visual attention. And I don't have them listed on this slide, but for those that are more into anatomy, I will just tell them to you here. So the parts of the brain that have been identified as playing a role in visual attention include the visual cortical relay centers. Make sure I'm seeing all my notes here. And those are in the lateral geniculate nucleus and the occipital pole. We can also have deficits in visual attention if there's damage to the circuitry of the posterior areas of both temporal and parietal lobes. And if there's damage to the frontal eye fields. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here again. A lateral prefrontal, the frontal eye fields, the lateral frontal prefrontal cortex in the prefrontal lobe, that area is damaged. It can affect visual attention. And finally, the limbic circuitry. So even the limbic system is involved in visual attention. So if you have damage in those areas and your visual attention is affected after brain injury, this is not uncommon in people who have had damage to the right hemisphere of their brain. And this can affect their ability to scan to the left side of the body, or they may even lack a general awareness of the environment. And if a person has visual inattention, they may have difficulty like locating items in a grocery store because they are only noticing things on the right side of themselves and aren't even paying attention, or their brain doesn't have the capacity to attend to that left side. Some of the folks we've worked with here at On With Life, if they have visual attention deficits, they may only shave the right side of their face. Or if you're going in to get something out of the refrigerator and you're trying to find the milk, you may not be able to locate it because you're only paying attention to one part of the refrigerator. Now, if we relate that to baking, as we've been through all of these areas, if a person has difficulty with visual attention, they may have difficulty scanning to the left to make sure that they've mixed all of the batter, say if they're making muffins, or if they have attention problems, visual attention problems, it may take them longer to make the muffins because they're either distracted if there's somebody talking in the background, or they're talking with a family member while they're trying to make the muffins. They can either work on making the muffins and visually attend to that, or they can visually attend to their family member who they are talking with. Or if you are trying to make some muffins and your mind starts to wander and you're not able to keep your thoughts and attended to your muffins, if you're like myself, sometimes you start to get distracted by how much laundry there is to do, and then you may just actually stop attending to your muffins altogether and go do your laundry, because, you know, people have stuff to do. All right, so with all of these possibilities of what can some of the common ways that vision can be affected by brain injury, where can we seek help? So like I mentioned when we were talking about the objectives for today, we're going to start with some of the medical interventions and resources that are available. And then we will move on to OT services and then some governmental agencies. The services that I will be addressing today are ones that I have referred persons served to. I've also worked with some of these resources, and then I've also received guidance from some of these different services to help me with a person served approach to their visual needs in their OT treatments. So first we have here, I'm sorry, I'm just going to step back just a bit. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware that the services I'm specifically talking about today are ones that I am familiar with in the central Iowa area, because that is where I work. And so those are the areas that I know the most about. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. So from a medical perspective, if a person has had vision changes after a brain injury, they may go to an ophthalmologist. So an ophthalmologist is a medical doctor, so somebody who went through medical school who specializes in eye and vision care. And so what they do is they diagnose and treat eye diseases. They can perform surgery for eyes, and they can prescribe corrective lenses. Excuse me. Now, a subspecialty of that is neuro-ophthalmology, and that's actually a subspecialty of both ophthalmology and neurology. And a neuro-ophthalmologist evaluates vision problems in the nervous system. So that is kind of, when you think back to the anatomy of the eye that we talked about, it's more of that last slide that we looked at as far as brain anatomy and vision. So a neuro-ophthalmologist is looking at that part of vision after brain injury. So the neuro-ophthalmology department that I have worked with, as far as like persons served that have been evaluated there, or we have referred people to be evaluated by neuro-ophthalmology, is at the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. So I have there, and that's at the eye clinic there at the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics, and I have their phone number there. For you to, if you have questions, you can certainly contact them directly so that they can answer your questions. Okay, so the next slide on where a person can seek help if they have vision changes after a brain injury is an optometrist. And an optometrist is actually usually one of the first places that the person served tell me that they've gone to check, because when they notice changes in their vision after a brain injury. And an optometrist is not a medical doctor. They didn't go to medical school, but they went to specifically optometry school. So they're a doctor of optometry, and they they're the folks that provide primary vision care, including testing and treatment and management of vision changes. So the optometrist is the person that you can go to if you need glasses, so that you can see better if your acuity has changed. There's also a specialty in optometry. So if you see the credentials F, C, V, O, D, those are optometrists who have a board certification in vision development and vision therapy. And these optometrists are actually the optometrists that I've worked with more closely here at On With Life. And they actually, each of the clinics listed here have vision therapy, where they have vision therapy specialists that work with people to help retrain them after either if they have developmental issues with vision, or following a brain injury. So the two optometrists that we at On With Life have worked with are Dr. Beth Treble, and her office, she has two offices, one in Urbandale and West Des Moines. And so I have the phone numbers listed there for you if you have questions for her office. And then the other doctor of optometry that we have worked with here On With Life, who has the FCVOD credential, is Dr. Eric Romsdahl. And he works at the Child and Family Vision Center in Ankeny. And again, I have his phone number listed there if you have questions for his office. Okay, then we'll go on to the next slide. So on this slide, I'll give a brief overview of OT services, but in the next slide, I'll go into some more detail about how OT can help after a brain injury and vision changes. But overall, an occupational therapist is someone who evaluates and treats the impact of vision changes on daily living skills, homemaking, work, and driving. It does require a prescription or an order from a medical doctor, such as your family doctor, a neurologist, or a physical medicine and rehabilitation doctor, for us to be able to complete an evaluation. So again, I'll talk a little bit more specifically about OT at the next slide. And then another resource that is out there that sometimes people may not always think about when people have had vision changes after a brain injury is the Iowa Department for the Blind. And the Iowa Department for the Blind has a lot of services for people with either congenital or acquired blindness, either from illness, injury, disease, and brain injury. And so I have listed some services here that they have available. They do have a vocational rehabilitation program. They have an independent living program. They have an adult orientation and adjustment center. They have a library for the blind and physically handicapped. They have a business enterprises program, and then they have an aids and devices store. And we've actually referred some folks here from On With Life to the Iowa Department for the Blind, even when they have partial vision. So they may not necessarily be what one would think of as like blind from birth, but they have either low vision or specifically a lot of the folks that we have that have like a field cut or a significant field cut that makes them almost completely blind, but they may have like a sliver of a visual field cut, or excuse me, a sliver of a visual field available to see. We've referred folks to the Iowa Department for the Blind. And again, I have their contact information there if you have specific questions for them. Okay, now how can OT help after a person has had vision changes, and how can OT help move a person forward? Some of the main things, or not main things, but some of the things that we can help with in occupational therapy is we can provide and teach people environmental adaptations and strategies for self-care, such as dressing, cooking, reading, or work. For example, here at On With Life, we've worked with folks on how to use a line guide. For example, if they have a visual field deficit, we can teach them how to use a line guide to make sure they are able to guide their attention across the entire page. We can teach either person served or their family members on how to use different colors of plates when they're eating certain types of food. For example, we'll teach somebody that, gosh, if you're having mashed potatoes, why don't you get out that black plate and put the black plate on maybe on a lighter colored placemat so that you can distinguish each item from each other more effectively. We also teach people about some different safety tools and equipment that they can use during meal preparation, such as a rocker knife, or there's adapted cutting boards that can help stabilize the food when people are cutting. We've also worked with some people on some adaptations that they can do with their computer for returning to work, such as if the person is very sensitive to light, we can determine if a light filter or a screen filter over the computer monitor can help reduce glare. And then we here at On With Life in our OT department, if a person served has ocular motor dysfunction, we actually have different eye exercises that we teach them to help them move their eyes more efficiently. Probably one of our highest tech pieces of equipment that we use here at On With Life is called a Dynavision. And we use that both for visual scanning, retraining, and visual motor reaction time testing and retraining. And just to kind of bring us back to the baking example and how I would help somebody as an occupational therapist who has vision deficits if they like to bake. For example, if a person's having trouble reading the recipe, we may teach them how to use a line guide to follow along the recipe. Or sometimes we will actually adapt the recipe to have it be a larger font or organize it in a different way to help with visual scanning or visual attention. If a person's having trouble with scanning, we will actually use the Dynavision to help retrain visual scanning in a structured way. And that can help people when they're trying to locate items in the cupboard or on the counter for when they're trying to bake those yummy muffins, because you want to make sure all those ingredients are in there. So those are some of the things as in the occupational therapy realm that we specifically do to help people after vision changes from a brain injury. And so if you know of a person who they and their doctor agree that they might benefit from occupational therapy services, this is my contact information if you have questions. If you have questions specifically for me, probably email is the best way to get a hold of me because I am treating folks throughout the day, so sometimes I'm not always at my phone. You can also call the On With Life outpatient phone if you have some more general questions, and either our office manager or scheduler can answer some of your more general questions or forward you on to me. And then also a person's doctor can fax an order for occupational therapy evaluation and treatment to our office here at On With Life. And then our scheduler will help you schedule that evaluation. Okay, so in summary, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just in summary, so today we discussed the complex anatomical system that makes up vision. We discussed the common vision changes after brain injury, where to seek help, and how OT can help you move forward with your life with lifelong vision changes. So that's my presentation. So I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any questions at this time.
Thank you, Sue. That was very, very helpful. And as everybody wants to go ahead, if you have a question and you haven't already put it in the question box, go ahead and do that now. And while you do that, just as a reminder, you can always reach out to us at the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa if you are in need of any brain injury resources or information. Our Neuro Resource Facilitation Program is designed to help connect individuals in Iowa with brain injuries, along with their loved ones and the professionals that are serving them to the needed supports and services in their communities. Also, we here at the Brain Injury Alliance always are available to provide case consultations to any professionals. If you have a client with a brain injury and you're looking for more support in finding resources or services for your individual, you're always able to provide that as well. So let's go and see if we have any questions. Look in my All right, so we do have a couple, so let me look at them real quick and find which one came first. Okay, so Sandra had asked a question about lesions. So lesions on MRIs, she says, do not always show up. So if you have an impairment like she does, she must have a lesion. What kind of testing shows double vision, or would you be able to speak to that, Sue?
Yes, Sandra, thank you for mentioning that. Yes, sometimes lesions injuries don't always show up on any scans. So as far as an occupational therapist, what I would do, one is I would look at how your eyes are moving together to see if they are able to move smoothly, if they're able to keep on target. So I actually do a visual assessment of a person's eye movements. And then for some folks, then what we would do then is refer them to the optometrist, either Dr. Treble or Dr. Ramsdahl, to help us try to tweeze out some more things that might be causing the double vision, and then how we can then proceed from there on how to help get that make it better.
Perfect, thank you. So we have a couple more. One from Gina, wondering if there are more neuro-ophthalmologists or neuro-optometrists and getting proper training on specifically brain injury information and how to serve individuals with brain injury. So would you know anything about that, Sue, about the training they receive specific to brain injury?
Both neuro-ophthalmologists and neuro-optometrists do have training in their schooling regarding brain injuries. Like I mentioned, Dr. Ramsdahl and Dr. Treble have worked, not only do they have they participated in a fellowship to get advanced training working with people with brain injuries. They've obviously, since I've worked with them, they've worked with a lot of people directly who've had brain injuries. I didn't have have this particular neuro-optometrist listed, but there is an organization in Cedar Rapids called Vision in Motion. And there is an optometrist there, Dr. Fitzgerald, who has some advanced training working with individuals with brain injury.
Yes, I was just going to mention that as well at the end of the session too. So yeah, she's a great resource over there. And Gina, I know that it looks like you have some more additional questions. And if you are able to email or call us with those questions, because it seems pretty specific, and I'd like Sue to get back with you or I with more specifics. So please go ahead and email or call us with those. But I believe that is the rest of the questions. So thank you, Sue, for spending your lunchtime with us and for giving this
You're welcome.
wonderful and very valuable information. We have so many people all the time asking questions about vision and how it is impacting their life after their brain injury and what to do about it. So I know this will be helpful.
I just wanted to say thanks for having me again, Annie. And yeah, anybody that has additional questions, feel free to reach out to either Annie or myself. And again, my email is probably the most efficient way for me to for you to get in contact with me.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Sue. You all have a great rest of your day.